Okay, so today is November 2nd, 2022, the Feast of All Souls. This is Carol Dawn, and I'm here with Liz Ann Eaton, and we are interviewing Judy Wargin, who was a staff member at St. Matthew Parish as our liturgist for many years. So, Judy, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. And can we start by can you let us know what years were you at St. Matthew's?
Okay, I was hired to start July 1st of 2004. But I actually started on the 30th of June, 30th of June, because everyone on the staff starting July 1st, including Father Bill, were going on sabbatical for 2 weeks to save money for the parish at that time. So when I started on July 1st, other than maintenance, who weren't anywhere near me, I was all alone. But it was a good way to get started. And then I was here until June 30th of 2017, so 13 years.
Very good.
Describe briefly your past experience and what led you to your position at St. Matthew's.
Okay, before coming to you, I was working at St. Therese Parish, and they were downsizing, and I wanted to still work full-time. And Carol Dawn, who I worked with at St. Therese and then also here at St. Matthew, told me about the position at St. Matthew. So I came twice, once to your Saturday Mass and once to your Sunday Mass. I think I came to the Sunday Mass first, just to see how you prayed and whether I thought I would be a good fit with you. I've done that with every job, just to see, because not all parishes are equal. And I really liked the parish, and when I was here the second Mass, which was your Saturday, I ran into Alice Hatzenbeller, who was on staff, who I knew very well, and she said, well, they've just stopped all the interviews. And I went, oh, and she said, Bella, I'll introduce you to Father Bill Stanfield, and we'll see what he says. So after Mass, she introduced me to Father Bill, who said, well, we just finished all our interviews. And I think I must have looked like a little sad puppy dog or something. And he goes, well, if you can send me by tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, this is Saturday night, send me your resume and some references, I'll let you know. And so I went back to St. Therese Parish where I was working and I haven't done a resume in years. I'd been there 10 years. So I quickly did that, wrote some people to recommend me, sent it to Father Bill, and then waited. And on Tuesday he called and said, the committee agreed we'll interview you if you can come in today. And I said, well, I can't come in today because I'm working at the other parish and I have funerals. I said, I can't come in until Saturday. So on Saturday, I came in, and I have to tell you, I was so impressed with the interview process. It was the best I think I've ever seen. I started out with Father Bill, one staff member, Shelley Madden, and then parishioners over at the rectory, and they, for 45 minutes, questioned me on just church in general, not just liturgy and music, but church in general. And then they said after 45 minutes, we'll go over to the church and you can play and sing and get an interview with cantors and choir members, and we'll see what happens, and parish council, or prayer and worship members. And then when that 45-minute interview was over, he said, well, let's go to the rectory and talk. And we did, and he said, we'd like to offer you the job. And literally my mouth dropped because I thought it would be a while and they would talk it over. And so I am forever grateful to Carol Dawn for telling me about the job, because I really loved my years at St. Matthew's. Even though there were tough times, I loved what I did.
So what is one of your earliest memories once you were hired of a time at St. Matthew's, or maybe like your fondest memory as you think back at your time at St. Matthew's?
I'm going to go back to when I started, where everybody else went off, and I'm all alone back in the prayer and worship office. A couple called me on the phone and then came over, Pat and Bernie Marino, both now deceased, to ask me if they could place flowers on the altar that weekend, because it was the anniversary of their two grown daughters who had died each within 2 years of each other of rare diseases, and to remember that. So I had a wonderful visit. So I'm all alone there and have a wonderful visit with Marinos. Got to know them very well, and that relationship continued on for a long time. Also that first week when I'm all alone there, Jeannie McDonald, who is the 7th grade teacher, came in to do something in her classroom and came and introduced herself, and we got to know each other. And she and I both left St. Matthew's the same year, so I also got to know her well. Just the welcoming people on prayer and worship, the choir who had to get used to somebody new, cantors who had to get used to somebody new. That was all good experiences. So I'm a very people person, and the people at St. Matthew's were wonderful.
It's good to hear. So describe the church buildings when you first joined the parish, and did they change during your time there?
Yes. and this could go into a challenge also. It was shortly, a few years after I was there, that school parents wanted the church to become a gym and use the church. And they said, and we'll set it up every week for masses. And so a battle of sorts began with some strong parishioners who had good points. They loved sports, and their kids were in sports. However, to me, the parish exists first and foremost to praise God and to gather as a faith community with the sacraments. And I just felt you're shortchanging the main purpose of a parish if you turn the space into back and forth. And you never knew when a funeral was going to happen, weddings, decorating, creating an atmosphere that helps you pray. And so Father Bill, who just kind of stepped aside and said, you take over and convince the council of doing this or not doing this. And luckily the council listened to what I had to say, and the church remained just a church.
That was when you first started?
That's right after I first started practicing. So got to know the council really well those years that happened. And then a few years later is when Building and Grounds proposed changing the church from the altar at one end and all these long pews going back into the altar kind of in the middle and a semicircle of pews around them. And I remember the first time I came to St. Matthew's for Mass to check you out, I sat kind of in the middle of those long pews, and I'm short. I couldn't see much. People around me were not singing, so when I sang, I felt like I was singing all by myself. I felt very alone amidst a group of people in that configuration. So I was definitely behind turning the church around. A lot of the older parishioners were not, because it was going to take several weeks, and each week they'd set up chairs in a different configuration as they're working on the process. And I can remember, parishioners that I got to know well, older ones coming up and complaining, I can't sit on a chair, and da-da-da. And I said, this is very temporary. You're going to love it once it's all done. And once it was all done, it was the best decision to make. And they've made a lot of improvements while I was there and after I left. I had the keyboard from hell. Old, really bad keyboard. You never knew what it was going to play, and it never sounded like what it was supposed to sound like. And when Father Pat came, that got changed because he could hear. Luckily, he's a musician. He's a musician. The other priest before, it didn't make any difference, but with Father Pat it did, and I'm grateful for that. And I got a really good keyboard, and they've improved it since. They improved the lighting, they improved the sound system, and every once in a while I come back to Mass at St. Matthew's because I still feel at home there, even though I'm far away and at another parish. But I come back and I love the changes that I've seen, and I love how my decorating crew has managed to create an environment in a place that was supposed to be a gym, but they've made it a church.
During your tenure, has the involvement of the laity changed at all or much?
Somewhat. Like every parish I've ever worked in, there are certain people you can always count on. They're always going to step forward and help. St. Matthew's had people like that, and I was grateful for the people who were there already in place. But eventually, people want to move on to something else, or they burn out, or they get too old, and so you get changes. And when you get changes, it was wonderful to see new people and new faces step forward. So in that sense, and that's one of the reasons I decided to leave, even though I probably could have worked a little bit longer. I was able to do it, but it was good both for me personally, and then for the church, the parish, to have new blood come in, because then you have new life. And it's like a breath of fresh air. And Chris O'Loughlin, I worked with her for almost 2 years before she took over. And so it was a really smooth transition. So yes, I did see, I wish there were still more parishioners who would see that we're a family and we all have to work together to make this parish succeed and the school succeed. So I wish there were more that would step up and help out. But that's every parish I've ever been. Mm-hmm. But when we did have needs, like when I forget who was the full-time sacristan when I first came, who set up for Mass, did everything, took care of holy water. I don't know who that was, but that person left. And so then I'm scrambling to see, well, who can fill the holy water fonts, who can just, clean around the church, minor cleaning that Dan can't do all the time with the big facility he's in charge of, who can water the flowers, because I was doing that, and I thought, this is something somebody else can do. And so I put out appeals, and every one of my appeals got answered. Who can clean the server's albs? Who can clean Father's alb? And people stepped forward and took over, and I was very happy.
So describe the focus of your role when you first were hired, and describe how maybe it changed, if it did, over your tenure.
The only way my role really changed was when I went, two things. When I started, I had a regular secretary who was wonderful, who did all the typing, the orders of worship, all that, the running them off, everything, and did all the buying of the things that we need for liturgy. Then she left. And I think for budget reasons, I got a temporary secretary who only did part of that. And so some fell on me, including getting to know the people at Stempers really well whenever we needed anything. And I didn't mind doing that because I was on my way to work. So those are just little things. But the one thing that did change is when Alice Hatzenbeller left, the RCIA team came to me and said, could you help us? Because we don't have a staff person or a leader. Now, that was not my job, and I never considered it part of my job. I was director of liturgy music, and that stayed liturgy music. The RCIA ministry that I took over became, since I was a parishioner at St. Matthew's at the time, that was my volunteering as a parishioner to do that. And it was the best decision I ever made. I grew a lot, appreciated so much people's journey of faith by taking over RCIA. Alice had a crew all set up, a team that did all the nitty-gritty stuff, so it was a very smooth transition. I had to scale back from what she would do, because that was her job when she was there. It wasn't my job, just volunteered. So I cut back, but with a great team, we managed, and every year we had people who journeyed in their faith and became Catholic. Sometimes were baptized, including our maintenance man, Dan Walks. So you never know who you touch in your work, and who will then see a need for being part of a faith community. So that changed, but it wasn't part of my original job. It was my volunteer work as a parishioner.
What committees or activities did you focus on in your time at St. Matthew's, if there's anything beyond what you've already kind of touched
Our CIA was the main, well, I had prayer and worship committee.
Mm-hmm.
I would have meetings with the different liturgical ministers, just to give them some faith formation. Not everyone has time to do that, but I made time because I felt that was important. So I met with the ushers and the lectors and the Eucharistic ministers, and obviously choir. And of course I did school masses, which I loved. I loved working with the children. And each Friday, a different class from little on up were my choir. And that was a time to not only get them involved in the music of liturgy, but to understand more about the liturgy. So I use that as a teaching tool as well as practically we need music at your mass and readers and all that. So,
were there any memorable events in the life of the parish while you were there that stood out to you? Anything?
The last one, the year before I left, and I gave a 2-year notice that I was leaving because I did other things that weren't necessarily in my job description initially, like RCIA. I gave a 2-year notice, and the year before I left, we had the 175th anniversary, and that I thought that was just the most marvelous experience of parishioners and the people who put it on and formed it. And I forget who the woman was who took over the food.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most glorious, fun celebration of what a parish has been and can be. So that was a highlight. Every Easter, Triduum, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, the Easter Vigil, Easter Sunday Masses, that was a highlight every year. And I had really wonderful people involved in the liturgies. And I was proud that I had a choir that could handle all the liturgies. You know, Christmas is Christmas, but the Easter time, that's the heart of our faith. And so those were memorable. And I thank God that every Holy Thursday we made it in procession from the main building to the Little Brick Church without it being a rainstorm.
Yeah, true.
Yes. I don't know how that happened, but it did.
Can you think of any memorable staff members that you worked with during the time that you were there, and maybe mention what made them memorable to you?
Okay, well, there were a lot of memorable staff. 2 that left, Alice Hatzenbeller and Tom Schneider, were very memorable because we met as staff and talked things out, and that was important. And they both added a lot. Carol Dawn and Shelley Madden were my mainstays for all 13 years that I was there. And the 3 of us would brainstorm. The 3 of us would share our difficulties. The 3 of us would, question, what can we do better? It was just a wonderful group. I just sent Shelley a birthday card and said, I thank you for being an inspiration when I was at St. Matthew's. And Carol, you were as well. Marge Schultz, when she came in as secretary, added a lot. But Carol and Shelley were the highlights, really.
All right. Who are some of the memorable parish members that you worked with, and what made them memorable?
I hesitated answering this because
somebody might be learning.
There are so many. There are so many people that made 13 years at St. Matthew's wonderful years. I just picked out a few here. So there's many of you that I could say. I should have mentioned Dan Walks also as a staff person that was so helpful. Whatever I needed, Dan was always there. Dan was always positive. He just made my life easier when I was there. Parishioners, Carol Sagan, who was head of my prayer and worship committee when I first started, and she was on the team that interviewed me before the job. She bent over backwards helping me for so many years before she stepped aside. Ruth Shabilsky, who headed the bereavement, made funerals, and funerals were my favorite part of my job. We're all going to die. We're all going to lose someone we love. And when you can gather as a community of faith and celebrate the life of that person and their passing on, I think that's extremely important. And Ruth and her group, bereavement group, really helped with hospitality and things until when she stepped down after doing it for many years before I even got there. The team just took over and continued. Marianne Rukas, who left the parish a year before I did, if I needed help with anything, Marianne was there. She was my cantor on a notice, sang in the choir, decorator, but just go-to person for anything. Lisa Marshall, when she came to help with the decorating, that made the decorating, brought it to a new height. So I'll always be grateful that she said yes and kept saying yes. Betty Ann Weiss and Liz Ann Eaton on my RCIA team.
Oh.
You two also. If you ever needed to be built up, you spend time with Liz Ann or Betty Ann.
How kind.
Oh. And all the times you invited me to come to dinner. If you look in a dictionary under hospitality, Liz Ann's picture is there.
Thank you.
So they were both helpful. And then Deb and Bill Alstrom, again, cantor, choir, decorators, just if you need help, I will pitch in. Those key people, and they were like that from day one till the day I left. Mm-hmm. If you needed help, if you needed encouragement. But there were many more, and I feel bad if I haven't mentioned any. I could have written a whole long list of people, some of whom are deceased now, like Teresa Egbash, who was wonderful to me. So
great. Is there anything else that we didn't ask you or didn't touch on that did come to mind when you were, making your notes that you would like to comment on?
I was grateful for having at Christmas time, and this developed over the years, not only a children's choir at the first Christmas Eve Mass, and making sure that I was able to have both children from the school and children from religious formation combined together. That was important to me, that it was truly a parish group of children. It could be a lot of work and headaches, but it just really helped. And I liked the way that developed. And then my young women's group that sang at the second Christmas Eve Mass, which changed times while I was there. Lastly, it was at 6 p.m. Those young women, to give their time, and it took a lot of effort on both of our parts for them to learn music, but they added so much to hear those youthful voices. My cantors at the early Mass on Sunday, and that was usually Marianne Rukas and Deb Alstrom and people like that, to get up early, and then to come back for the second Christmas Mass and sing again, to have the full choir there. I'm really grateful for all the people who shared their talents that way. That's about it, probably.
Well, great. Well, thank you. We're grateful to you to share your memories, and we very much appreciate it very much. So thank you.